Hey guys, tonight we slip into the darker corners of the royal household, those places the history books rarely linger. Imagine yourself inside a great stone castle, its drafty halls echoing with footsteps, and its icy walls dripping with condensation. You might think royal women lived surrounded only by velvet cushions and golden crowns. But tonight, we're peeking into the less glamorous truth, the absolute worst jobs for royal women in medieval history. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive this without gagging once or twice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are right now. I love seeing our little community map light up across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You picture yourself standing in a long corridor, lined with tapestries, trying to ignore the faint, sour smell wafting from behind heavy wooden doors. This is where your first task awaits, chamber pot duty. Yes, even in castles filled with jewels and marble floors, human nature had to be dealt with. The garde-robe or privy was not nearly as elegant as the name suggests. Instead of modern plumbing, there were pits, chutes, and, far too often, buckets. And who had to keep those buckets emptied and clean? Very often, royal women or their ladies-in-waiting. Imagine kneeling in your fine gown, trying to steady your hands as you carried away something no one else wanted to acknowledge. The irony was sharp. A woman might wear a crown glittering with rubies, yet still find herself confronted with the everyday grime of human existence. In some households, younger princesses were expected to attend their elders in this way, an awkward reminder that privilege came with hidden humiliation. Historians still argue whether queens themselves ever personally lifted the dreaded pots, or if this was symbolic, performed once as a show of humility. But even if rarely done, the expectation hung over them, and the embarrassment lingered like the scent of ammonia in a cold chamber. Now, it wasn't just the act itself that was dreadful. Imagine being the unlucky woman on the night shift when a banquet had ended and too much wine had flowed. Those buckets filled quickly, and accidents were not rare. There are records of noblewomen forced to open windows in the dead of winter, hands frozen to the iron handles as they tried to haul away the burden. The task was so despised that some castles built guard-robe towers just to drop waste directly into the moat below. Of course, that only meant the moat stank so terribly you wouldn't want to walk near it. Picture a queen trying to promenade by the water with a courtier while gagging at the smell. Romance ruined. One curious tidbit: some of the garderobes doubled as secret storage places for clothes. Why? Because the ammonia rising from the waste was thought to repel moths. Imagine storing your silken gown above a pit of filth that does keep the bugs away, but at what cost to your dignity? And here's where humor softens the edges. You, with your delicate slippers, probably wouldn't last more than an hour at this job. One slip on the damp stone, and the crown wouldn't be the only thing in danger of falling. But duty was duty, and royal women often had little choice. Their lives, so often painted as luxurious, carried hidden tasks that blurred the line between queen and servant. And the chamber pot duty, humble as it seems, reflected something deeper, a truth that even the highest-born women were never fully spared the mess of ordinary life. You sit back now, imagining the clatter of wooden lids, the slush of buckets, and the reluctant sighs of women who wished for anything, absolutely anything else. This was only the first of many jobs that chipped away at their supposed grandeur. You step deeper into the castle, and hear a faint cry echoing through the stone halls. It isn't the sound of a bird or the moan of the wind, it's the piercing wail of a newborn. Tonight, your role shifts to that of a royal midwife, one of the most nerve-wracking, exhausting, and perilous positions a woman could hold in the Middle Ages. Midwives for noble families lived in constant tension. Imagine being summoned at any hour, your hands still red from scrubbing, as servants rush you into the birthing chamber. The room would be dimly lit with candles and reeking of herbsage, rue, lavender, all meant to ease the labor and ward off evil spirits. Superstitions clung to every corner. A crooked candle flame was a bad omen, a dog howling outside the window might mean death. And here you were, expected to keep both mother and child safe while whispering prayers under your breath. Now, here's the cruel part. If the birth went well, the glory was credited to the father, or perhaps to divine favor. But if it went badly, if the child was stillborn, or if the queen herself fell into fever, it was the midwife who bore the blame. Some records describe women dragged into courtrooms, accused of incompetence or even witchcraft. Historians still argue whether these trials were really about justice, or simply a convenient scapegoating of powerless women. You can almost feel the sweat on your brow as you lean over a royal bed, where a young princess clenches her jaw and cries out, gripping the wooden posts so hard her knuckles whiten. You know that if she dies, it is not just a tragedy, it might mean war, because dynasties depended on heirs. That's quite a bit of pressure when all you have are lion cloths, a few herbs, and whispered charms. One quirky tidbit comes from the English court. Sometimes midwives were required to testify that the infant really came from the queen's body. Rival factions worried that babies could be swapped or smuggled in to secure the throne. So, Midwives had to act as both nurses and eyewitnesses, vouching for the bloodline itself. Imagine that, delivering a baby while also keeping mental notes like a courtroom clerk. You probably wouldn't survive this role without frayed nerves. Think of the endless nights awake, the screams, the whispered prayers, and the knowledge that your livelihood hung on every fragile breath of a newborn. Humorously enough, some midwives joked that they aged twice as fast as anyone else, and honestly, who could blame them? Now, picture the aftermath. A successful birth meant no rest for you. You stayed by the mother for days, watching for fever, changing bandages, brewing restorative broths. If the infant was weak, you might even be asked to find a wet nurse immediately, sometimes rushing through the town streets at dawn, cloak flapping, desperate to find a woman producing milk. The dignity of court life was nowhere in sight, only your itching legs, your swollen hands, and your pounding heart. It is humbling to think that royal history, with all its pomp and ceremony, often hinged on the quiet, invisible work of women whose names have long since been forgotten. The crowns, the wars, the alliances all depended on the cries of a newborn and the skill of a wary midwife. And while the world praised kings for conquering territories, it rarely paused to thank the women who ensured a dynasty even existed to begin with. As you leave the chamber, the cries slowly fading into soft whimpers, you realize, the royal nursery may have been swaddled in silk, but it was built upon sleepless nights and trembling hands. The cries of infants fade behind you, replaced by the gentle scrape of needles on cloth. You step into another chamber, one quieter but no less suffocating. This is the embroidery hall, where royal women spent endless hours at their hoops and frames. On the surface, it looks peaceful. Rows of women in silken gowns, fingers dancing through linen, colored threads weaving pictures of saints, lions, and vines. But linger longer, and the truth reveals itself. This was less a pastime, more a prison of patience. Needlework was praised as virtuous. Chroniclers loved to note how queens stitched while waiting for their husbands to return from war, as though embroidery alone proved their piety. But the truth was that women were often trapped here for hours every day, their lives stitched into wall hangings rather than lived freely. Your shoulders itch just imagining it, hunched over for so long, eyes straining by candlelight, fingers raw from pricks. The Bayeux tapestry, that sprawling masterpiece of conquest, is often cited as the work of noble women's hands. Whether that's entirely true, historians still argue. Some claim it was produced by professional workshops, others insist it was indeed royal women toiling away in drafty rooms. Either way, the association stuck. Noble ladies were expected to embroider their legacy, one stitch at a time. Now imagine being a young princess, itching to ride a horse or explore the gardens, but instead ordered to sit still for hours, threading gold onto velvet. Jokes from the period hint at the monotony. One poet quipped that noble women stitched to forget their sorrows and remember their husbands' absences. A sarcastic jab, yes, but also a wary truth. And this wasn't just about leisure. Embroidery was political. A misplaced color or symbol could be seen as disrespect. If you embroidered your husband's banner incorrectly, enemies might whisper that you cursed his campaigns. If you stitched too slowly, you were lazy. If you stitched too beautifully, you risked being accused of vanity. The thread, no matter its color, always tangled around a woman's reputation. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some queens were so proud, or perhaps so desperate for acknowledgement, that they had their stitching displayed publicly. Eleanor of Castile, for instance, was famed for embroidering robes and altar cloths, which were shown in cathedrals. But you wonder, did she truly love the craft? Or was it simply the one acceptable outlet she had for creativity? You probably wouldn't last long in that stifling room. A single dropped needle on the rush-covered floor, and you'd be on your knees searching while the matron scolded you. And heaven forbid you yawn, because yawning suggested idleness. Best to keep your eyes wide and your fingers moving, even as your soul drifted elsewhere. In a way, the embroidery chamber was like a cage padded with silk. Beautiful to look at, but claustrophobic to live in. The clang of swords and the roar of hunts stayed outside, while inside, the women bent their heads, stitching birds and beasts they would never see in the wild. The irony was sharp. Their labor produced works that outlived them by centuries, yet their names were often lost, buried beneath the cloth itself. So as you rise from the frame, rubbing your sore wrists, you realize something. These women, remembered as delicate and idle, were in fact workers endlessly, invisibly laboring to keep up appearances for courts that never let them breathe. You follow the scent of roasted meat and bright herbs into the great hall, and the mood shifts from hushed stitches to clattering plates. Torches hiss. Platters steam. A herald sings out each dish as though reading a poem. And there you stand with a small silver spoon in your steadying hand. Tonight you serve as the poisoned taster, the quiet guardian between a royal woman and whatever malice might ride in with the sauce. Court meals behave like ceremonies. The cupbearer, the chanson, if you like a French flourish, presents the goblet, the steward slices, the carver displays each cut as if it were a saint's relic. Before any morsel touches a royal lip, you sip, you nibble, you wait. You count slow heartbeats while pretending you are simply savoring time. If needlework was a prison of patience, poison tasting is patience with a timer attached. Here is the plane. Truth, medieval elites feared poisoning constantly. It wasn't only kings who worried, queens, dowager duchesses, and highborn girls at betrothal feasts all sat beneath the same small cloud of suspicion. To calm that fear, many courts used ritual testers, sometimes servants, sometimes the ladies themselves taking ceremonial sips to prove goodwill. Historians still argue whether actual poisonings were anywhere near as common as people believed, or whether anxiety vastly outpaced reality. You memorize rules. Take from the center of the platter in case an enemy dusted the edges. Dapple a drop of wine on silver because rumor says it darkens in the presence of arsonists. It doesn't, but rumor rarely checks its chemistry. Keep an eye on the salt cellar. It travels from hand to hand like a little ship of state, and a pinch in the wrong place can cause a storm. You eat like a sparrow, but watch like a hawk. A mainstream fact steadies you. Courts treasured universal antidotes, especially. They're also called venis trachlistaki, expensive medicine of dozens of ingredients that physicians praised for centuries. Bizarre stone shard masses found in the bellies of goats sit in gilt mounts because people believe they can draw out poison from a drink. A small jar of theriac rests at your belt, its lid waxed tight, like courage you can uncork with a thumbnail. Then comes the glamorous nonsense courts adore, a so-called unicorn horn, really a narwhal tusk set into a cup or scepter to keep drink safe. A queen may rest her fingers there as if stroking a fairy tale, comforted by the idea that magic has joined the household staff. Quirky. Absolutely. But in a room full of knives and cousins, you take comfort wherever it politely offers a chair. Humor keeps you steady. You promise yourself hazard pay in pastries. You practice a tester's signature move, the tiniest possible bite followed by the grandest possible smile, as if to say, delicious, your grace, and also I am not falling over. And when the kitchen sends eel pea greasy, slick, and stubborn, you murmur, if the poison doesn't get me, the bones will, and the maid beside you almost chokes on a laugh. The waiting is the worst part. Etiquette demands a pause after each test, long enough for the room to see you still standing, short enough that the soup does not sulk into coolness. You learn to fill those pockets of time with compliments. The rosemary sings, you say, or, the baker's crust could carry messages home. On winter nights you count 30 breaths. In summer, when everything tastes of garden and warmth, you count to 25 and pretend you are simply listening to lutes. Beneath the ritual, politics hum. If a duchess hosts your queen, you are as much diplomat as tester. To refuse a dish entirely insults the host, to eat too eagerly implies you suspect nothing, and may be knave. You thread the middle path like a dancer, tasting enough to honor the cook but not so much that you become the feast. Remember the garderobe towers from earlier. Court life also prefers invisible plumbing channels of courtesy that carry danger quietly away without anyone admitting to the smell. A small, odd detail, some households keep a trial hound, a cheerful little dog who receives a lick of anything suspicious. If its ears stay perky, the table relaxes. You scratch that dog so often it begins to love you, which might be the gentlest shield against fear that a person can own. Another habit wanders through travelers' tales, rings with tiny hollow bezels for carrying antidotes, or whispers hint, for the opposite trip. Whether those rings were common practice or mostly rumor, historians still debate. You also read faces. The kitchen boy who suddenly won't meet your eyes. The steward whose kindness arrives late. The guest whose laughter lands half a beat early, as if anticipating a scene. Your senses grow fox sharp. You can smell saffron before the platter crosses the threshold. You can tell by the gloss of a gravy whether the cook let it rest long enough. With mild amusement you notice that fear improves your memory better than any schoolmaster. You could recite every pie on the board and their bakers, too. Calm has its place. You never dramatize. You attend to the queen's cup as if it were a cradle. You keep your movements small, your voice low, your jokes light as steam. When a new dish arrives, almond milk pottage with a dash of rosewater, you sip, then say, if I swoon, let it be from the poetry. The table smiles. Tension folds itself like a napkin. What do the records show behind the curtains? Many medieval courts employed official offices, cupbearers, butlers, tasters embedded precisely to prevent mishap. Chronicles mention antidote chests locked inside bedchambers and physicians hired as much for their calm as for their cures. Still, rumor outpaces paper. The most famous poison tales often bloom later, in the Renaissance, when gossip learns to wear perfume. The medieval world certainly fears poison, but whether real attempts were frequent or merely feared remains a scholarly tug-of-war. By the end of the feast, you are full of nearly nothing, a mouthful of this, a breath of that, and ready to sleep for a week. The queen rises. The hall rustles like silk shaken from a chest. You pass your little spoon to the maid, who polishes it as if it were a shield. As you go by the hearth, the cook catches your eye and mouths thank you. You nod, because gratitude is its own warm broth. And in a small private promise you decide that tomorrow you will test the honey tart twice, strictly for safety, of course. You notice, too, how this job turns you outward. Embroidery bent your eyes down, midwifery pinned them to one bed, but tasting makes you watch the whole room. You become a mapmaker of glances and ladles, a cartographer of the table. It is work that asks for courage with a smile and terror with tact. And like so many of the worst jobs royal women carried, it leaves no inscription but the memory of a dinner that ends uneventfully, which, in court arithmetic, is the finest miracle of all. The feast's clatter fades, and the corridors hush to the slow toll of a bell. Wax breathes its honeyed scent, tape strays dim to dusk. You step into a chamber where the fire is banked low and everything voices, fabrics. Footsteps moves as if muffled in snow. Tonight your role is one no one envies, the royal widow, appointed to the longest job in the castle's endless morning. From the first hour, your body becomes a timetable of grief. Servants bring you widow's weeds, garments dyed in somber tones that swallow candlelight. A heavy veil folds over your brow, a tight wimple smooths the jaw and hides stray glimmers of hair. In some Burgundian and French courts, a distinctive line in band called a widow's barb hugs the chin so firmly it advertises chastity before you utter a word. It's practical, symbolic, and let's be honest about as breathable as a biscuit. Your wardrobe turns into a charcoal sketch, blacks, murks, and the occasional brown that looks like it sighed and gave up. On the bright side, dressing is faster. 50 Shades of Soot is still one decision. Grief here is not only feeling, it is choreography. You kneel at specific hours for the office of the dead. You sponsor masses whose laden murmur stitches a steady seam through the day. You distribute alms so the poor may pray for the soul that shared your bed and your burdens. A mainstream fact steadies you. Great ladies often endowed chantries permanent funds to pay priests to say masses for a loved one's soul. It's a ledger of mercy, carved into the calendar. You sign papers with a dolorous, deliberate hand. You review the pantry for bread to give away. You check the beeswax stores for more candles. You become, in effect, quartermaster of sorrow, ordering supplies for grief like any other household task. If grief had an accounts book, you'd color code the tabs. Yet the job has politics in its hem. As Queen Dowager or Duchess, you are not merely a woman in black but a hinge on which kingdoms swing. Sometimes you are expected to serve as regent for a minor heir, as Blanche of Castile did with resolve and shrewd calm for the young Louis VI. Sometimes, though, the wyoed crown is treated like a dangerous spark near dry kindling. A well-known late medieval example in England, Parliament restricted Catherine de Valois, young widow of Henry V, from remarrying without consent, lest her new match tilt the balance of power. Your heart may be your own, but your hand is a matter of state. Historians still argue whether strict seclusion for royal widows was truly the norm, or mostly an ideal promoted by moralists. Manuals talk of quiet rooms, lowered eyes, and long retreats. Account rolls and letters sometimes reveal a different picture: women riding out to inspect dower manors, negotiating revenues, hiring tutors, even nudging councils with velvet-covered elbows. Either way, you learn to carry two candles at once, one for private loss, one for public order. There are rules, of course. Jewelry shrinks to prayer beads, sometimes carved of glossy jet from northern shores, a material medieval people prize for its sober gleam and protective reputation. Meals go plainer, music softens. Laughter is not forbidden, only ration. You learn the arithmetic of appearances. One smile can reassure a fractious court, but two might invite whispers that your heart is already light. Your solution: smile with your eyes. It fools exactly half the room. A quirky tidbit wanders in with the laundress. Some households kept special cupboards just for mourning clothes, stocked like winter stores, because death, especially in turbulent times, visited as regularly as the taxman. When fate knocked, the chamber opened, and out came the veils as neatly as feast plates. If that sounds grimly organized, remember that castles organize everything: torches, tapestries, even silence. Why not grief? The chamber of mourning is its own careful landscape. The bed is moved so the headboard faces a holy image. The rushes on the floor are renewed more often to keep a clean scent. Letters from abbeys cluster on your writing table like roosting doves. You hold the key to your dower chest, a practical symbol of your rights to land set aside for your maintenance. With it comes a slow freedom. You approve repairs on a bridge. You decide which chapel receives a new lamp. You direct that a yearly dole of bread be given every saint's day. Loss makes you a manager. You joke to your maid that grief comes with ledgers, and you would like a clerk and a nap. And yet the Edika King Che. There is the official year and a day ID, often quoted in lore suggesting a proper full cycle for mourning. Historians still debate how uniformly such a span was observed among the highborn. Local custom, family politics, and health could stretch or shorten it. But you feel time differently anyway. Some mornings your cloak weighs a little less. Other days the pins in your veil seem forged from iron and reluctance. Restrictions on remarriage curl around you like Evie. If you are young, alliances sniff the wind. A match to a neighboring lord might secure borders. A match across the sea might soften old grudges. Your body, once an emblem of hairs, now represents corridors for treaties. If you are older, whispers prefer you settled quietly in a dower castle with books and bees. Curiously, books do write up psalters, saints' lives, the occasional romance you pretend not to enjoy. Needlework returns, too, but with a different weight: memorial cloths, pious hangings, small embroidered gifts for shrines. The hoop that felt like a cage earlier becomes Sometimes, a window one you can open and close with your own hand. Ritual also brings comfort you never expected. You discover you like ordering extra bread on Fridays, because the line at the gate is longest. Then ingratitude arrives like a flock of sparrows. You have the chapel hang a lamp earlier in winter so the children of the household aren't frightened by the early dark. When the chore sings the slow cadences, you close your eyes and taste rosemary from some feast long ago, yes, the one where you practice your best poison taster smile. Memory becomes a herb garden. You rub a leaf and your hands smell of safer days. Your humor, gentle and dry, survives. When the steward apologizes that the wardrobe holds only black, you say, excellent. I never have to worry if my shoes match, and the maid bites her cheek to hide a laugh. When a cousin suggests a fashionable gray, you murmur, I'm saving that for when I feel reckless. And when the counsel drones too long, you whisper to your confessor that the dead may rest easier than the living do during meetings. Soft jokes keep the stitches from tightening too much. Truth peeks in with the morning. Morning is work. You host condolence. Visitors, and remember every name. You console the young pages who adored your late lord and bribe them with honey cakes. You send a gentle note to the cook, who is suddenly terrified to salt anything boldly, and tell him that boldness in soup honors the dead better than timidity. You sign your name so often it begins to feel like a prayer. You learn to carry a small vial of rosewater, partly for headaches, partly because life simply smells better with gardens in your sleeve. There is one more thing you learn that no book teaches. Sorrow, given a steady shelf, begins to share space. Beside it you store mercy, and beside that quietly, like folded line in resolve. The court notices. Servants stand a little taller when you pass. A boy in the stables asks how to read, and you send him to the chaplain. The black veil still falls each morning, but beneath it the shape of a person reassembles, bit by gentle bit. Someday the bell will toll for something else, a coronation, a treaty, the say, return of a son. On that day you will stand at a window, and remember the embroidery room that caged your hands, the tasting spoon that steadied your courage, the garderobe towers that taught you that even castles must manage ordinary mess. And you will nod, because you have managed a different kind of mess, a kind that lives in the heart, and the calendar, and you have done it with quiet competence. For now you draw the veil forward, feel the linens cool against your cheek, and breathe. The lamp glows like a small planet above the prayer desk. You sit. You begin the day's careful, dutiful work, which is also a way of loving what is gone. Dawn opens like a pale shell over the palace roofs, and you are already traveling, at least in your mind. Today's duty is not in a chamber but on a map. You are the political marriage pawn, a living treaty folded into silk and wax seals. You stand in the privy garden with your cloak gathered close, learning the first rule of royal matrimony. Before you marry a person, you marry a border. The arrangements begin in a room that smells of ink and beeswax. Clerks sharpen quills. Names of rivers, towns, and dowries march across parchment like obedient soldiers. You keep very still, because the slightest word can sprout consequences with long legs. A mainstream fact steadies you. Among Christian elites, marriages within prohibited degrees of kinship required papal dispensations, permissions from Rome acknowledging that family trees in Europe resemble ivy hedges. After later in 1215, the church narrowed those degrees, but the habit of asking Rome's blessing lingered like incense. So before your trousseau is packed, a courier has already galloped off to fetch a seal. You practice kindness as strategy. A marriage like this means new language, new saints' days, new cooks who put cinnamon where you expected sage. You rehearse your diplomatic smile. No. 3, warm enough to charm, cool enough to survive a winter of politics. No. 1 is for celebrations. No. 2 is for relatives. No. 4 is for surprising cousins with sharp questions. Your maids line your coffers with sachets of rosemary to keep moths away. In the lid of the first chest you slip a small vial of rose water, the same quiet comfort you carried through widow's chambers and embroidery rooms, because some luxuries are simply courage that smells nice. Not every marriage requires 2 bodies in one church. The proxy ceremony waits in a side chapel. A trusted lord stands for the groom, handing you a ring and, in certain courts, a glove or sword to symbolize his absent hand. You speak the words, the priest knots the vows, witnesses sign with formal flourishes that look like birds taking flight. Historians still argue whether proxy ceremonies were rare pragmatisms or fairly common tools among far-flung dynasties, but the tales across courts agree on this. Paperwork can bind hearts faster than ships can carry them. Then the road. The retinue clatters through the gate. Hooves sparking, wheels singing a high wooden note. Your coach smells of new leather and hope. The windows open onto barley fields and gossip. Children wave, old women cross themselves. A shepherd raises his staff and bows as if you carry summer in your sleeves. You learn to measure distance by provisions. 3 loaves to the river, a jar of quince passed to the abbey town, 2 cheeses to the border. You resolve to write a travel guide titled Brides, Bread, and Borders, but suspect the market is niche. If water divides you from your fate, the ship waits low in the tide, rigging humming like a harp. You taste salt on your lip and hold the rail as if it were a promise. Sailors mutter good omens. A priest blesses the mast, the cook recommends ginger for the stomach and offers it with such solemnity you take it as sacrament. A quirky tidbit to jingle in your pocket. In Iberian weddings, the groom traditionally gifts 13 coin seras to the bride, tokens of shared goods and shared burdens. You have tucked your 13 into a little purse. On the voyage you count them when the sea groans, as if arithmetic could quiet waves. Arrival is a ceremony of eyes. Courtiers study your gown, your accent, your posture on the steps. You bow to elders, exchange pleasantries with cousins, locate the nearest friendly dog, and memorize the steward's name because stewards are weather vanes. You read them to know which way the palace wind intends to blow. The Queen Mother offers a kiss that tastes faintly of clove, the King an oath that tastes of policy. And the city bells ring as if pleased to practice their loudest vowels. That night, you are introduced to the palace saints and the palace schedule. It turns out both feast days and councils prefer to cluster on Tuesdays. Your new work begins before the wedding gowns are unboxed, learning the household. Which bishop speaks softly but carries a spear of influence, which captain admires poetry, which aunt believes laughing in Lent is a misdemeanor. You practice the language with children first, they forgive accents that adults tax. A mainstream truth returns, queens often served as peacemakers by exchanging gifts, letters, and small mercies across border ribbons that held together what swords too easily cut. You learn which wool pleases which guild, which herb garden needs a fountain to keep the neighbors cooperative, which monastery will copy your letters swiftly and without adding beloved marginal cats where they do not belong. Of course rumor sticks to brides like burrs. If the treasury coughs, someone will say your dowry arrived late. If the weather turns sour, someone will suggest your stars do not like the local moon. Historians still debate how much true agency royal women wielded in these years. Were they pawns pushed by councils, or players moving diagonally, quietly, like bishops? The record shows both, women who bent, and women who bent the board. You file that ambiguity beside your rosewater and keep walking. Ceremony day arrives with trumpets and linen like snow. Your gown rustles like a forest, your hair, confined by a circlet and veil, feels like weather tame. The mass opens, and peace passes from lip to lip by means of a polished pax board, another small, shimmering object to anchor nerves. You glance at the groom and see the same calculation behind his smile. In marrying each other, you marry the problems you did not make. Someone drops a hymn, you rescue it with a stronger note. Later the streets fling paddles and jokes. One baker offers you a tart the size of a shield. You take a delicate bite and declare it strategically excellent, because you are still the taster of tensions even with sugared fruit. The betting rights, whispered about more than witnessed, belong to custom rather than spectacle. Doors close, pages scamper, older women plump pillows with the firmness of treaty clauses and then thank heaven to part. You breathe. You look at the man who is both person and policy, and you agree, without words, to be kind in the small ordinary ways that keep roofs on houses, tea when throats are sore, forgiveness when mornings are gray, louder when plans unspool. The realm will demand hairs, the court has eyes. We will return to that pressure soon, but tonight, peace is a hand-on glove. Humor blinks its gentle eye. You discover that politics snores. Work resumes at once. You compose letters to your birth family, measured, affectionate, never gossipy enough to travel without boots. You walk the infirmary with baskets of brush. You sponsor a fountain near the washerwomen so winter is kinder. Suddenly your name circulates with warm water and gratitude. You learn the coinage and the nicknames for the coins, because nicknames tell you how people feel about their purse. You sit in council galleries and pretend to embroider while doing math on your fingers. A lord whispers an old proverb. You offer a newer one. The room tilts toward compromise. Some days are light, walking on the meadows, reading a romance aloud to ladies who embroider lions that resemble kindly sheep. Some days are heavy, disputes over customs posts, visitors with sharp smiles, rumors from the border that make soup taste metallic. When the heaviness gathers, you visit the chapel and light a taper for patience. The little flame steps up like a brave soldier. You remember the garderobe towers, and the truth they taught every great house has unlovely necessities, and you square your shoulders. This marriage is a necessary thing, and you will keep it clean, or at least well aired. If the future is kind, your work will look like luck. When harvests are steady and tempers moderate, no one will sing about the letters you wrote, the jokes you told at exactly the right moment, the visits you paid to the guild that mended the bridge before anyone fell in. But you will know, as you draw the curtains each night, that being a pawn is only the beginning of the story. Pawns, after all, are the pieces that become something else when they make it to the far side of the board. The morning bells chime again, and this time the air tastes of incense rather than roasted meats or treaty wine. You are no longer a bride nor a widow, but something set aside altogether, the cloistered daughter, given over to the convent. For many royal women, this was the quietest yet most suffocating job of all, a life of enforced piety. Your footsteps echo across flagstones polished by centuries of skirts and sandals. The convent gate closes with a heavy bar, and the sound alone tells you this is no temporary visit. Here you are meant to spend decades, perhaps an entire lifetime, behind high walls. Some princesses went willingly, embracing a calling, Others were deposited here like surplus furniture, packed away when diplomacy ran short of use. Historians still argue whether most of these cloistered royals found peace in prayer or desolation in confinement. The letters that survive suggest both some glow with devotion, others read like sighs on parchment. The routine feels steady as clockwork, maidens in the middle of the night, lauds at dawn, prime after sunrise, and the cycle continues through the hoursters, sext, nun, vespers, compline. Bells guide you more firmly than any steward ever did. Your body adjusts, rising in the dark, eating meager meals, sleeping on straw-filled mattresses. Comfort, once measured in velvet cushions and banquet dishes, shrinks to a hard bench and a bowl of lentils. You joke to yourself that lentils are fine company, they never interrupt. Still, dignity clings in strange ways. As a royal daughter, you may be offered a larger cell or finer vestments. Some abbesses, themselves of noble birth, treat you like honored kin. Yet favoritism can bruise. Other sisters mutter that your hands are too soft, your prayers too loud, your veil too perfectly folded by maids who still sneak through the gates. You are both inside the order, and slightly outside it, like a candle that flickers but refuses to go out. One mainstream fact steadies you: noble women confined to convents often became patrons of art and learning. Some established scriptoria where manuscripts were copied and illuminated. Others sponsored music, embroidery, even medicinal gardens. A convent could be a quiet cage, yes, but it could also be a workshop of beauty. You, too, are expected to lend your name and purse to such endeavors, turning your forced retirement into a legacy that survives in books and bricks. And yet the rules pinch. Silence at meals means you listen to scripture rather than conversation. Fast days seem endless. Cold cloisters press their damp breath against your bones in winter. The one luxury permitted is prayer, repeated until it feels less like speech and more like heartbeat. A quirky tidbit slips in: some convents kept pet cats to protect grain stores from mice, and letters describe nuns doting on them with affection, even sketching lull poems about their antics in the margins of prayer books. You find yourself stroking such a creature, its purr echoing like comfort in a stone shell. Sarcasm flickers gently in your mind. So this is the grand destiny of a princess: feeding chickens in the yard, memorizing psalms until your tongue trips over them, watching bees in the herb garden like they are your only subjects. If royal blood makes you special, the hens remain unimpressed. And honestly, perhaps that's their gift to you: humility with feathers. Your role as bride of Christ also comes with politics. Powerful kings sometimes use their cloistered sisters as spiritual ambassadors. A letter written from a convent could carry as much diplomatic weight as one from a throne, especially when wrapped in language of devotion. You might be ordered to intercede with a pope, or to sponsor a pilgrimage site, or to host visiting dignitaries within the convent walls. Even in seclusion, you are never entirely free from the tug of family duty. And then there is the question of vows. Some women took them young, never fully grasping the weight of forever. Others lingered as boarders for years, their status uncertain, waiting for politics to decide whether they would stay or be married off after all. That ambiguity gnaws at you. Each time you light a candle, you wonder if you are also lighting the last flicker of a life you might have lived elsewhere. Historians still debate how often cloistered princesses truly embraced their fate or simply endured it. Perhaps the truth, as always, is a braid of both strands. Still, the convent is not only shadow. Gardens bloom. Psalms rise. A sister with a laugh like rain teaches you to make ink from oak galls, and suddenly your days hold a new craft. You find quiet pride in binding books, in teaching novices to sing a psalm straight, in coaxing a stubborn herb into blossom. Humor surfaces too. One winter, when the soup is thin, you whisper to your neighbor, "At least the spoon is light," and she hides her grin behind her veil. So you pass your years here, not entirely forgotten, not entirely free. You may never again ride through a market with banners unfurled, but you leave your mark in smaller, subtler ways. A book copied. A hymn taught. A garden tended. It is, perhaps, not the worst life, but it was never yours to choose. As you blow out your candle tonight, you realize something: whether chamber pot duty, midwife's burden, or cloistered piety, the pattern repeats. Royal women are told their place, and their work, however sacred or profane, becomes the scaffolding of kingdoms. And yet, inside each role, a spark of humor and resilience flickers just enough to keep the darkness from winning entirely. The convent walls fade, and suddenly you're back in a court that never sleeps. Tapestries shimmer, chandeliers sway, and whispers run like mice along the corridors. Tonight's task is not physical labor or quiet prayer, it is endurance. You are the royal woman who must survive as the constant target of gossip. Court life is a theater without curtains. Every move, every sigh, every glance is a performance. If you smile at one lord, another accuses you of flirting. If you frown at a sermon, suddenly you are branded irreligious. Even the color of your gown becomes ammunition: too bright, and you're vain; too plain, and you're sulking. The truth: most days you are simply cold, tired, or trying not to sneeze in a room that hasn't been aired since Easter. Mainstream history backs this. Letters and chronicles are filled with commentary on queens' appearances and behavior. Chroniclers wrote about hairstyles, ladder, and even the way noble women walked through halls. The smallest gestures were preserved like pressed flowers but twisted with bias. And because history often leaned on men's pens, women's reputations lived or died at the mercy of someone else's quill. You probably wouldn't last long in this storm of scrutiny. Imagine trying to sip wine without someone whispering that your hands trembled. A cough might suggest illness, weakness, or worse, a poison. And the very act of retreating to your chamber could be spun as arrogance. Humor softens the edges. You once overheard two courtiers argue whether you ate too much bread or too little, as if the fate of kingdoms hinged on your appetite. You wanted to tell them you were just trying to avoid the eel pie. Quirky tidbits of gossip culture abound. In some courts, professional news spreaders carried tidings between noble households, much like medieval tabloids. A queen could wake to find her reputation already in tatters from something she supposedly said in her sleep. One story claims that a duchess was mocked for yawning too often during mass. Historians still argue whether she was truly irreverent or just very tired of long sermons. And then there's the weaponization of fashion. Tenants' tall conical hats were mocked in sermons as devilish horns, yet queens who avoided them were accused of lacking majesty. If your sleeves trailed on the floor, people whispered you were wasteful. If they were cut short, you were stingy. Truly, you were stitched into a garment of no-win choices. Court musicians and jesters didn't help. A jingle here, a ballad there, and suddenly your private scolding of a maid becomes a tune sung in the marketplace. You become both amusement and scapegoat. Even kings were not immune, but queens bore it with sharper edges because their virtue, beauty, and fertility were seen as public property. One mainstream example, Queen Isabella of France, married to Edward I of England, was branded the she-wolf by later chroniclers, who painted her ambition and strength as monstrous. Whether wolf or not, she was certainly judged more harshly than her male counterparts. Your heart itches at the realization, to be a royal woman was to walk daily through a hall of mirrors, each one wore. And yet, resilience shines. Some women turned gossip into a weapon of their own, planting stories that undercut rivals. Others embraced public piety, lavish donations, saintly appearances to drown rumor in incense. A few even leaned into the jokes, laughing loud enough to turn them into shared humor instead of humiliation. You, too, practice that trick. When whispers rise about your new cloak, you quip, "Yes, it's enchanted, it hides me from boredom," and the crowd bursts into laughter rather than malice. Still, it is wearying to live each day as though painted on a page, judged for breathing too shallowly or blinking too fast. The embroidery hall felt like a prison of hands, the convent like a prison of hours, but court gossip is a prison of eyes. You cannot stitch or pray your way out of it, only endure, only adapt. As you slip back into your chamber, you rest your forehead against the cool wood of the door and breathe. You remind yourself that the courtiers' chatter is as fleeting as smoke. Tomorrow they will whisper about someone else's coif, gown, or choice of shoes. And maybe, just maybe, the record will forget their words but remember your deeds. For now, you smile at your maid, accept a cup of spiced wine, and whisper the oldest truth of court life: if they talk about me, at least they're not talking about how badly the cook burned the stew. The halls are quiet again, but this silence is different. It presses in with the weight of expectation. Tonight you step into perhaps the most exhausting role of all, the ceremonial baby factory. As a royal woman, your body is seen less as your own and more as an engine for heirs. From the moment you marry, courtiers glance at your stomach as though it were a public announcement board. Every faint queasiness sparks speculation. Every delay brings whispers. A mainstream fact steadies you. Dynasties depended on clear succession, and when no heir was born, political crises often followed. The Wars of the Roses in England, for example, were fueled in part by disputes over who had the right to rule when lines of descent grew tangled. And so, queens became less people than conduits of peace or war. You can almost feel the scrutiny. Midwives hover, physicians prescribe odd mixtures of herbs, astrologers chart the stars to determine the best nights for conception. Some advise pomegranate seeds for fertility, others suggest sleeping with a holy relic beneath your pillow. A quirky tidbit, in France, it was rumored that tying a frog's thigh bone to your left ankle could encourage pregnancy. Imagine being draped in silks and jewels, but secretly wearing frog charms under your skirts. And then the cycle begins. Pregnancy after pregnancy, some ending in joy, others in heartbreak. Each loss is not only personal grief but a political catastrophe. Courtiers count months as carefully as merchants count coins. You hear the footsteps of rivals ready to whisper that perhaps you are cursed, or worse that you are deliberately failing. Historians still argue whether infertility was more often blamed on the woman or quietly suspected in the man. Records suggest both, but it was always the queen who bore the sharper sting. The ceremonies of childbirth, meant to honor you, feel like theater. Great beds draped in silk, relics laid out beside pillows, candles burning at all hours. Yet the chamber is crowded with attendants, witnesses, and clerics there to verify not only the child's safe arrival but its legitimacy. Privacy vanishes, your cries are part of the court's official record. Even the afterbirth may be inspected, treated as proof that nothing deceitful occurred. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer indignity without sarcasm. Perhaps you'd mutter, "So glad everyone came to the most personal event of my life. Shall I pass around pastries, too?" And when the child is finally swaddled and presented, the weight of expectation doesn't ease. If it's a boy, cheers echo through the castle. If a girl, the applause is polite but thin. Your heart may swell with love regardless, but you cannot ignore the disappointed looks, the subtle sighs. A daughter is a child, but not always in hair. You must prepare to try again. Even your diet is police. Too much spice, and they'll warn you it heats the blood dangerously. Too little meat, and they'll say you're starving the future king. Every cup of wine, every bite of bread, comes with commentary. It's enough to make you laugh dryly and say, perhaps the child should write the menu. There are victories, too. When a healthy hair survives, festivals ring out, coins are minted, poets compose verses praising your virtue. You become, briefly, the most celebrated figure in the realm. But even in triumph, the task repeats. More children secure the dynasty, more pregnancies anchor alliances. Your body remains a battlefield dressed in lace. One queen who knew this well was Eleanor of Aquitaine, mother of 10 children who shaped Europe's map. Chroniclers marvel at her resilience, though. They rarely pause to imagine the toll of 10 pregnancies in an age without modern medicine. Another was Catherine of Aragon, who endured multiple stillbirths and miscarriages, her grief twisted into political disaster when no surviving son lived. These women were both mothers and symbols, their personal sorrows measured against kingdom's fates. By the time you finish this role, your body is weary, your back bent, your hands trembling from years of strain. And yet the world remembers only the hairs who lived, not the nights you wept into your pillow. The job was brutal, relentless, and inescapable. So as you lie in the great bed, curtains drawn close, you think not of crowns or thrones, but of how strange it is that your worth has been measured by tiny footsteps echoing through long corridors. And you whisper to yourself the one truth no court sermon will ever admit, that you were always more than a cradle, even if history refused to see it. The door to the royal wardrobe opens like a said or scented sigh. You step into a world of cloth and quiet arithmetic, where violet pools like night, and pearls tick like tiny moons against wooden trays. Tonight your job is the least visible and somehow the heaviest, mistress of the wardrobe, a keeper of gowns, jewels, pins, and the delicate theater of getting a royal woman dressed without incident, scorch mark, or scandal. The room hums softly, flaxen threads whisper through fingers, a lion smoother and agate slick stone glides along cuffs to set the crease, and somewhere a chest lid thumps shut with the authority of a judge. You take inventory before dawn, 1 hopeland of crimson lined in miniver, 3 coharties in sober blues, 2 kirtles stout enough for travel, 4 veils with their edge-embroidered vines, and a circlet of Balas rubies that refuses to stop catching on hair. You sign for each with your fine, cramped hand while a maid witnesses, because every gem that leaves its padded nook must return to it like a pilgrim. To shrine. A mainstream fact steadies you, royal households kept meticulous wardrobe accounts. In England the great wardrobe tallied fabric, livery, and jewels in ledgers that minded farthing and fur, while cross-court sumptuary laws tried to fend certain colors, furs, and cloth of gold for the high-born alone. The list could be devotional in their detail-own girdle of silver gilt with 22 bezants, and you, who breathe among these objects, learn to read the story a kingdom tells about itself with thread. Dressing a queen is not clothes, it is choreography. First the lion shift, cool as early water. Then the fitted kirtle, laced smooth by practiced hand, side lacing for modesty, front lacing when speed matters, back lacing when the realm has 3 extra minutes. Breathe, you murmur, and she does, trusting that you will stop before bones complain. Humor helps, if patience were a fabric. You whisper to the maid, wet him miles of it before breakfast. Over this goes. The coat-hardy with its flirt of tiny buttons, how can something so small demand so much attention? And finally the sweeping hopeland whose train could double as a winter blanket for a small village. Pins are your constellations. You carry them in a little strawberry-shaped silk cushion, each prick mapped to habit. 2 at the veil's temples, 1 for the wimple under the chin, 3 to tame the gown's waterfall where it meets the girdle. Hooks, eyes, points, aglets, you command a private language of fastenings. A joke circles the room that you could build a small bridge with the hardware hidden in your sleeves. On very busy mornings you consider testing the theory. Headwear is its own mountain range. Today's choice, a modest veil or a hennin, a tall cone that lifts the eye and unnerves the timid. If the hennin is chosen, you set the wire frame carefully, add the transparent veil so it falls exactly like a waterfall tamed by prayer, and then stand between those fragile edges and every candle flame in Christendom. Your private maxim, 1 eye on the queen, 1 eye on the fire. Quirky tidbit, some households perfume their veils with sachets of lavender stitched into the corners. On windy days the queen trails a scent like a garden remembering itself. The jewels come out with ceremony. The circlet is checked for loose settings, the girdle weighs cool and certain in your hands. You record each piece with a chalk mark on the board, a quick cross like a blessing in Shorthin. When the queen moves, you move. When she sits, you rearrange folds. When she rises, you catch the hem before it gossips with a nail in the floor. Your body becomes the castle's invisible hinge. Historians still argue whether the wide sideless surcoats windowed gowns moralists scolded were genuinely scandalous or mostly practical, a way to display the costly kirtle beneath while keeping arms free. You have no patience for the sermonizers. You choose what keeps the queen warm, dignified, and mobile. Also, pockets are a dream whispered by the future. Until then, you are the pocket. Fast changes are the truest test. In progressions between chapel and audience hall you thread the queen through corridors with a small flock of maids, each assigned a layer, veil, belt, train. At the halfway room the robing nest, you call it a second cohorte is ready on a mannequin. Laces loosen with a sigh, new gown embraces like a friend, pins fly like clever sparrows finding new perches. You smooth the cloth once, twice, then stand back. If a single pleat sulks, you coax it into line with a patient thumb. If anyone calls this fussy, you smile. Peace treaties have been saved by a gown that did not trip on a threshold. The practical hazards are endless. Mud waits at doors like a patient enemy, so you keep strips of linen to bind hymns before crossing courtyards. Summer sweat threatens velvet, winter damp makes fur grumble, moths dream in dark corners. Remember the garderobe towers and their unlovely usefulness. Some clever predecessor stored seldom-worn garments in the hanging closets above, trusting the ammonia to deter moths. You do the same with caution, and a prayer, airing the treasures afterwards so court noses do not revolt. Travel multiplies your sums. Trunks are lined with oiled cloth, each gown wrapped in linen, sachets tucked where seams meet. You apportion one respectable wardrobe for the road, another for arrival, and a third for emergencies. Emergency, in wardrobe terms, meaning rain, spilled wine, unexpected ambassadors, or a puppy with opinions. You mark trunks with a system of stitched symbols so even a sleepy carter can place the right chest at the right chamber. When the escort reports a stolen fort ahead, you shuffle which gowns ride which weapon like a gambler who loves cards more than luck. You also keep a weather eye on fashion, which is a tide no duke can command. Sleeves lengthen, sleeves shrink, necklines are pious or cheerful depending on which preacher thundered last Sunday. A mainstream note, furs speak rankerman for crowning days, miniver for dignity without trumpet blasts, bear squirrel fur prized for pattern and warmth. Storytellers later play a pun between vair and vair glass, but you know shoes and scents travel better without either fur or glass. Leather does nicely. And then there are the days when the wardrobe is politics and purest silk. A foreign envoy arrives, you choose the gown worked with his country's favored color. A guild petitions for favor, you select a mantle trimmed in their city's best cloth. A saint's feast dawns, you bring out embroidered lilies for the virgin or a scarlet lining for a martyr. Your choices are sentences spoken without words. You wield them gently, and the realm notices. Meanwhile you guard health like a second physician. Cloth of gold is heavy as a promise, you limit its hours so shoulders do not itch into rebellion. Tight lacing is unkind. Breath, you loosen it when no one is looking and tell a joke to distract the ant who loves propriety more than oxygen. Joke 2, your grace, if fainting becomes fashionable, well need twice the maids. The queen snorts. The ant blinks. Everyone survives. Behind all this, the ledger beats its tie drum. You requisition dye stuffs, approve for repairs, count buttons. How do buttons multiply like rabbits? And budget for new linens because clean linen is a form of daily mercy. When a novice maid misplaces a silver buckle, you do not scold, you teach her the habit you learned from the midwife's chamber. Say the names of objects as you put them away. Circlet, tray, box, seal. Order is a lullaby the castle learns to hum. By night, you hang the gowns with space between them so they can remember their shapes, as your old mistress used to say. You turn down the lamp, lock the jewel coffer with 2 keys, yours and the chamberlain's, seal the ribbon on the great chest with a dab of wax and your tiny stamp a rose the size of a tear. Only then do you let your shoulders fall. Humor returns to tuck you in on the morrow. When someone compliments the queen's effortless grace, you will nod serenely and think, effortless takes 6 hands, 30 pins, and a prayer about candles. Of all the worst jobs, this one hides best. If you do it perfectly, the world forgets it exists. But you will remember the small victories, a veil that floats, a jewel that sits true, a gown that glides over a threshold as lightly as a promise kept. And somewhere in the hush after the last clasp fastens, you will hear the same quiet truth that ran through the embroidery room and the tasting hall. The realm is clothed in women's work, and most of it leaves no name behind. The wardrobe doors close, and another one creaks open, this time to a cold, unfamiliar hall. The banners on the walls are not yours. The prayers in the chapel sound strange, and the bread tastes of spices you cannot name. You are no longer the pampered daughter, nor the queen in her silks. Tonight you are the hostage bride, living in an enemy's castle, your very body a treaty that may or may not hold. You were likely sent here as part of a peace agreement. One border dispute, one war too many, and suddenly the terms included you, a princess promised in marriage, lodged at a rival's court to guarantee your father's good behavior. On paper, it is an alliance. In reality, it feels like gilded captivity. A mainstream fact steadies you: this practice was common in Europe and beyond. Marriages sealed truces, and noblewomen often lived as de facto hostages to ensure their families kept the peace. Think of Margaret of Scotland, sent to marry the son of King Henry VIII of England. Her presence in England was both matrimony and insurance. Your chamber looks lovely, but you know better. The tapestries smile too much, the servants bow too deeply, the doors lock too easily. Guards are polite but ever present. You learn quickly not to speak too freely in your own language. A careless word might be reported. Humor is your shield. When a maid scolds you for mispronouncing a local saint's name, you smile and say, "Forgive mate's the accent of the angel who taught me." Historians still argue whether these brides were treated more like honored guests or political pawns. The truth probably lies in between. You are wined and dined, dressed in gowns of foreign cloth, praised for your beauty, yet never allowed to forget that you are here because kingdoms fear each other. The rituals of daily life sharpen into performance. At feasts, you sit beside your new husband or the betrothed you may not even share a bed with, yet smiling as courtiers watch for any sign of discord. If you eat too little, they whisper that you disdain their food. If you eat too much, they laugh that you are greedy. The gossip you endured in your home court now multiplies in an unfamiliar tongue. You practice the trick of laughing half a second late, so you blend in without giving yourself away. A quirky tidbit: some courts required hostage brides to write letters home under supervision, their words checked line by line for hidden codes. Imagine pouring out your longing onto a page, only to have a stern steward frown at your phrasing. You learn to lace your affection into metaphors. A roses here bloom late, meaning I am lonely. It is a delicate embroidery of its own, stitched with ink instead of thread. The hardest part is the waiting. You are here to prove a truce holds, but truces tremble. One skirmish at the border, one unpaid dowry installment, and suddenly your life feels like a chess piece about to be swept from the board. On stormy nights, you lie awake, listening to the wind batter shutters, and wonder if your father will keep his word or if you will pay the price when he does not. Yet resilience grows in small places. You find comfort in the kitchen garden, teaching your maids the herb lore from your homeland. You slip coins to the children of servants, so your name circulates with kindness rather than fear. You even make friends among the court ladies, trading jokes about stiff collars and lopsided hennons. Sometimes you imagine that if peace holds long enough, this strange land may become yours. Still, the balance never leaves your shoulders. You are both guest and prisoner, both wife and bargaining chip. Your smile is diplomacy, your silence policy, your very presence a guarantee scrawled not in ink but in flesh. And you realize, with wary humor, that your job is the hardest kind of work, to live each day pretending you are free when everyone knows you are not. When you blow out your candle at night, the shadows of strange saints flicker on the wall. You whisper a prayer not only for peace, but for patience. Because if the truce breaks, your chamber will no longer be a gilded cage. It will simply be a cage. The castle halls are quieter now, but a different burden creeps. In this one made of numbers, coins, and promises inked long ago. Tonight, your role is not glamorous at all. You are the royal woman saddled with the job of dowry accountant. It sounds harmless enough, just sums on parchment, but in truth, it can stretch into decades of wary struggle. When you marry, your family promises a glittering dowry, lands, jewels, or chests of gold. The marriage contract lists them carefully, each item sworn before clerics and nobles. But promises are easier made than kept. The jewels may not arrive on time, the land titles may be contested, the gold may vanish on campaigns before ever reaching your new household. And who becomes responsible for chasing down those missing fortunes? You. A mainstream fact steadies you: dowries were central to medieval marriages, especially among royal families. They weren't just gifts, they were security deposits for alliances. Queens like Margaret of Anjou spent years negotiating for dowry payments from France, even while wars raged around her. Another case, Eleanor of Aquitaine brought vast lands as her dowry, a prize so valuable it shaped the politics of all Europe. You sit at your table by candlelight, parchment spread before you, quill tapping against your thumb. The steward reads aloud from contracts: 100 marks in silver, 40 mules laden with grain, 6 bolts of scarlet cloth. You sigh. Half of these were pledged, few delivered. And until they are, your position at court feels as shaky as a stool missing a leg. Historians still argue how much personal power queens really had in these financial disputes. Some say women were mere symbols while clerks handled the rest. Others point to endless letters written in queens' own hands, chasing payments with stubborn persistence. You know the truth: the task drains years, and the ink stains on your fingers are as much a badge of labor as calluses from needlework. The tedious part: writing reminder letters in flowery courtesy. My honored lord, may I humbly inquire about the 3 cartloads of wool pledged at my wedding? You want to scrawl: send the wool already. It's winter and we're freezing, but politics frowns on honesty. Humor becomes your relief. You joke to your maid: perhaps I should embroider my demands onto a tapestry, at least then they'll hang in someone's hall where no one can ignore them. And then there's the suspicion. If payments lag, Courtiers mutter that perhaps your family is faithless. If your husband grows impatient, he may take it out on you, as if you can conjure gold from thin air. Every delay chips away at your dignity. A quirky tidbit. Some dowries included livestock. Imagine being a queen waiting for oxen to arrive, only to hear they've died of plague on the road. You picture yourself writing a solemn letter of condolence to a dead cow. Sometimes the matter escalates. Envoys argue across tables piled with contracts, voices rising until you can barely hear yourself think. You must sit there in composure, the very object being debated, your worth measured in silver marks and pasture land. And though you sip calmly from a goblet, inside you want to mutter, I am not a chest of coins to be tallied. The pressure grows heavier when wars break out. Suddenly your unpaid dowry becomes an excuse for armies to march, for treaties to unravel. What was once a household grievance becomes a spark for battle. You realize, grimly, that your marriage bed is not only a cradle but also a treasury vault, and everyone wants their share. Night after night, you return to the ledger. You copy numbers, list pledges, write reminders. The ink blurs, the wax seals stick to your fingers, the arithmetic never ends. If a mark is paid, another is overdue. If cloth arrives, the jewels are missing. You probably wouldn't survive the monotony without sarcasm, so you tell your steward, if ever we receive all that was promised, they'll faint dead away, and you'll need to add smelling salts to the account. The truth is cruel but plain, the job of dowry accountant steals years. You are remembered in chronicles for being a queen, a duchess, a mother of heirs. But in reality, you spent long nights bent over parchment, tallying debts and praying your family's honor wouldn't crumble like ink on damp vellum. As you blow out the candle, you think about the chamber pot, the birthing bed, the embroidery frame. At least those labors ended with dawn. This one, the endless arithmetic of promises, is the job that follows you into your dreams. The candle gutters low, and with it comes a darker task, the job no royal woman wished for, yet many endured, scapegoat witch. You are still a queen, a duchess, a noble bride, but when calamity strikes, suddenly the whispers sharpen into claws, and all eyes turn to you. Imagine the scene. The crops fail, the river floods, the king falls ill, or the army suffers defeat. Logic should blame weather, politics, or chance. Instead, courtiers mutter that perhaps the queen's foreign ways, her odd accent, her private devotions are to blame. A mainstream fact steadies you. Accusations of sorcery against royal women were not unheard of. Joan of Navarre, Queen of England, was accused of witchcraft in the 15th century, though most historians agree it was a convenient pretext for seizing her wealth. Later, queens like Anne Boleyn in Tudor times faced charges of enchantments as part of their downfall. The medieval court was never short on scapegoats. You sit in your chamber, hearing the whispers filter through the keyhole. They say your herbs are too strange, your jewelry too glittering, your prayers too long. They point to the relic you keep by your bed, claiming it glows with unnatural light. In truth, it's just polished crystal catching the candle, but gossip loves a little shimmer. You laugh dryly to your maid. If I were truly a sorceress, I'd conjure fewer moths in the wardrobe. Historians still argue whether such charges were sincerely believed or cynically invented. Some say superstition truly poisoned minds, others insist men in power wielded witchcraft as a political weapon. Either way, you feel the trap close. The irony bites. You may have once been praised for your learning, your patronage of alchemists or astrologers, your skill with herbs. Now those same traits are twisted into evidence. If you write a letter in Sefer, it's sorcery. If you recover quickly from illness, it's unnatural. If you suffer miscarriage, it's divine punishment. You probably wouldn't last a day in this climate without sarcasm. When a courtier stares suspiciously at your pet cat, you quip, yes, my advisor he recommends more naps. The jester cackles, but the rumor spreads anyway. Porky tidbits add sting to the story. Some queens were accused of using love potions on their husbands, usually because the men were unusually devoted. Isabella of Bavaria, for example, was suspected of witchcraft when her influence over Charles VI of France seemed too great. Imagine being punished not for failing as a wife, but for succeeding too well. Trials, if they come, are cruel theater. No matter the evidence, your enemies twist it. If you weep, you are bewitched. If you stand firm, you are hardened by demons. The very shape of your body becomes a script others read aloud. Your jewels are talismans, your embroidery suspicious symbols, your prayers whispered in the wrong direction. And yet, in some strange way, these accusations reveal the truth of your importance. If you were powerless, no one would bother to accuse you. It is because you matter, because you are a pivot in politics, that enemies must paint you in shadow. You remember the convent cats, the wardrobe ledgers, the poison-tasting spoons. All were quiet labors. But now, suddenly, your role is too loud, too visible, and too easily turned into menace. One last bitter joke helps you bear it. When the steward nervously asks if you are truly innocent, you lean forward, lower your voice, and say, if I had real magic, do you think I'd still be stuck listening to council meetings? Even he chuckles. And for a moment, the fear lifts. As the candle burns down, you realize this job being the scapegoat, which is not about work you choose, but blame thrust upon you. It is proof that in a medieval court, even silence could be dangerous, and even virtue could be twisted into vice. And you whisper to yourself, before the flame dies, history will remember me as a witch. But tonight, I remember me as a woman who only ever wanted peace. The storm of witchcraft accusations fades, but the work does not grow lighter. Instead, it shifts into something quieter, ink-stained, and endless. You become the diplomatic letter-writing machine. For royal women, correspondence was not pastime, it was lifeblood. Imagine the chamber, a desk cluttered with parchment, inkpots, sand shakers, and broken quills discarded like snapped twigs. Candles gutter low, splattering wax spots across. Margins you will later have to scrape clean. You sit straight, shoulders itching, wrists stiff, dictating or writing line after line. Each letter is a thread in the web that holds kingdoms together. A mainstream fact steadies you: queens were often the glue in family diplomacy. They wrote to brothers, uncles, cousins, fathers, sons, and distant kin across borders. Isabella of Castell's correspondence, for example, filled volumes. Eleanor of Aquitaine's letters kept her far-flung empire stitched. The words of royal women carried real weight, sometimes soothing, sometimes scolding, often pleading for mercy or patience. But the work is endless. One envoy arrives, you must draft thanks. A border town is raided, you must send condolences and assurances. A plague creeps through, you must request prayers, supplies, physicians. Each phrase must be careful, too warm, and you risk rumors of favoritism, too cold, and you spark resentment. You probably wouldn't survive a week without sarcasm. When a scribe asks how formal you want the greeting, you mutter, formal enough to sound friendly, unfriendly enough to sound cautious. The scribe nearly smudges the ink from laughing. Quirky tidbit: some queens developed personal ciphers, codes for sensitive passages. A single misplaced symbol could change a meaning from aid is coming to aid is not coming. Imagine the stress of triple-checking every flourish of your quill. Historians still argue whether these women fully created such codes themselves or relied on clerks. Either way, the letters were signed in their names, and the responsibility clung like ink stains to the fingers. Your day blurs into formulas. To our most dearest cousin we pray this missive finds you in health. Concerning the matter of the wool tariffs, the language is polite, florid, and slow. And yet, tucked between the curtsies of words, you try to slip in humor and warmth. When writing to your sister, you add a line about the dog that stole half the dinner. When addressing a stern archbishop, you joke subtly that your prayers are so frequent the saints must be tired of hearing your voice. Still, the toll grows heavy. Your eyes burn from staring at cramped script, your hand cramps until you cannot feel your fingers. You ask for rosewater to dab on your brow. The maid whispers that your inkwell has drunk more wine than you have all week. You smile, though your heart itches with the monotony. Letters are not just words, they are survival. They carry dowry negotiations, pleas for peace, instructions to monasteries, blessings for children you may not see for years. Sometimes you seal a parchment with wax and realize you have poured more of your soul into it than any council chamber ever heard. But once sent, the words travel alone, vulnerable to storms, theft, or enemies who twist them into weapons. And so the cycle repeats: dictate, write, seal, send. Day after day, year after year. Some queens left behind hundreds of letters. Imagine the hours, the lamp oil, the cramped backs, the weary minds. Also, a kingdom might hold together with threads no one praises because they are invisible. Historians still argue whether these letters reflect true voices of the women or were shaped heavily by clerks. Perhaps both. But when you press your signet into hot wax, you feel ownership. The letter is yours, and its words may soothe a cousin into sending troops, or charm a bishop into lowering a tax, or persuade a rival not to start a war. You set aside your quill, flex your itching hand, and glance at the pile of parchment yet to be filled. The sight makes you want to laugh and cry at once. So you choose laughter. You whisper to your maid, if only I could embroider my letters instead, at least then people would admire them on the wall. But no embroidery will ever hang your words in a hall. They vanish into archives, or burn in fires, or molder in trunks. And still you write, because words are the invisible scaffolding of kingdoms, and you, the supposed weaker sex, are often the only one holding the pen steady. As you douse the candles, you imagine the echo of your words traveling across miles, like little ships braving storms. And you think, not without pride, kingdoms may stand on swords, but they survive on sentences. You wake in a castle that remembers you but no longer needs you. The corridors hold your footsteps the way a shell holds the echo of tide, and the servants fewer now, older now, but with the polite surprise of people greeting a portrait that has stepped down from its frame. This is the last job, retired queen in exile. Not the romantic kind with palm trees and distant harbors, but the ordinary medieval version removed from court, sent to a dour estate, expected to become as quiet as the rushes on the floor. Asa wears many faces. Sometimes it is punishment. A council that finds you too influential prefers you several valleys away. Sometimes it is protection, a regency anxious about Factions offers you a peaceful horizon, and a politely locked gate. And sometimes it is simply the arithmetic of dynasties: new queen in, old queen out, chairs scraped back, places reset. Historians still argue whether most royal retirements were comfortable retreats or carefully padded dismissals. The letters that survive suggest both, depending on weather and politics. Your new kingdom is measured in bees, bake ovens, and budgets. A mainstream fact steadies you: medieval queens possessed dower land estates assigned for their maintenance, bringing rents from mills, markets, and manors. You inspect fish ponds, lease pastures, approve repairs to bridges and barns. You sign warrants for timber, as if adding another log to a hearth you intend to keep lit. The steward reads accounts, you nod, ask after the tenants with names that sound like small rivers, and set aside coin for alms because habit has become religion. The rooms are honest about their draftiness. Your best defense is method. You move through the house with the old crafts in your sleeves, a sachet of rosemary for muffs. Remember the garderobe tower's unlovely cleverness, a pinch of salt for meat, a coil of ribbon you repurpose into curtain ties because no one else will think of it. The wardrobe you once commanded shrinks to a sensible handful: sturdy kirtles for mornings, 2 good gowns for visits, a mantle so warm it feels like an argument against February. You keep the agate slickstone because it pleases you when cuffs lie flat. A woman must have one small kingdom that obeys. There is politics even here. Messengers arrive, all breath and bows, to consult you on nothing in particular. Your letters are opened less often now, but you still write, to a niece about books, to an abbot about the roof, to a cousin about a rumor you refuse to dignify with more than 12 calmly chosen words. You brew rose water on summer afternoons, and this is a private indulgence: a drop on each seal before you press the signet. If words are ships, you want yours to sail smelling faintly of gardens. Porky tidbit: the swans on your river are not merely birds, they are assets. You log their marks in a little book, the notches that prove which household owns which flock, because nothing says exiled but attentive, like knowing precisely how many long-necked opinions glide past your mill each dawn. You also keep bees. The chaplain approves the honey for the infirmary, you approve the bees for their excellent gossip. They tell you when the lime trees bloom, and when the kitchen is late with bread. Some days the estate feels like a convalescent home for memories. The guardroom smells of pepper and stories. The chapel wax remembers more names than you do. A dog, no longer the glossy diplomat of court but a shaggy specialist in naps, adopts you and insists upon being briefed each morning on matters of consequence. You tell him the weather report and the status of the carrot bed. He concurs. Humor is a leash you gladly hold. You keep a small household school because knowledge makes winters shorter. The Reeve's daughter learns her letters tracing the shapes you once used to sign treaties. The scullion boy recites psalms with a voice so pure the kitchen weeps into the soup, improving it. On saints' days you invite tenants to the great hall, serve thick pottage, and let the children ring a handbell that used to call you to councils. You never announce it aloud, but this is the governance you prefer: spoons, songs, and roofs that do not leak. There are lonely passages. The new court sends you carefully cheerful news, festivals you no longer attend, hawking parties without your lao, feasts where the taster tests a cup you do not lift. You examine those tidings the way you used to test wine: dab, wait, breathe in, then you lay them down and choose the present instead. At dusk you climb the wall walk, look over hedges you ordered pruned, fields you insisted be sown with beans against a hard year. And you feel the kind of power that comes from things that grow slowly. Pawns crossing the board. You once said, this is what happens when one arrives. Becomes a quiet peace that steadies the rest. Visitors arrive like weather. Some bring gossip as if it were a devotional object. You pour them small ale and answer with larger patience. Others bring gifts, a reliquary spoon you grin privately, a little icon in wood, a bolt of cloth your fingers recognize as middling but earnest. You thank them in the 3 languages your life required you to learn: the native, the married, and the diplomatic. When they depart you stand at the gate and wave, the good aunt of a county that forgot it needed one. On winter evenings you return to the old hoop, but it no longer feels like a prison. You embroider saints with kind eyes and herbs with practical leaves. In the border joke that only you and perhaps God will notice, you stitch a tiny dog, a cunning bee, a thimble, a rose, a tasting spoon. The cloth catches the lamplight and, for a moment, the long corridor of your past looks less like a gauntlet and more like a garland. Historians still argue whether exiled queens plotted from their dower castles or truly retreated. You smile at the thought. You have learned that the smallest plots are the best, coaxing a stingy pear tree into generosity, persuading the steward to warm the great hall before dawn, sneaking another candle onto the writing desk of the Reeve's daughter because she stays up late to read. There are courts more dangerous than yours and courts less kind. You have chosen a third thing, to rule the ground beneath your shoes. And when snow comes soft, muting the hooves and the world, you sit by the hearth, turn your face toward its orange logic, and feel the entire long labor of your life settle like a cloak across your shoulders. It is heavy, yes, but it is lined with wool and memory. You close your eyes, hear the bees sleeping in their straw skeps, the dog soaring like a gentle bellows, and you think, exile is what they call it. I call it a final task done steadily. Let the castle grow quiet now. Let the corridors breathe out their long day, and the tapestries release their last sighs of color into the dim. Picture a small hearth ears, tonight in the way its light moves like slow water across the stones. The air is warm enough to loosen the shoulders, cool enough to make the blanket welcome. Outside, a few late flakes of snow drift down, softening the world into friendly shapes. You are safe here. The doors are strong, the latch is sure. The lamp on the table is turned low, its halo a little island where a quill sleeps beside a folded letter. You can almost smell the faint thread of rosewater from a bottle you forgot to close, just a whisper of gardens to carry into sleep. Somewhere in the dark, a cat rearranges itself into a perfect circle. Somewhere else, the dog offers a single agreeable thump of his tail and returns to dreams of uncomplicated heroism. Let your breath find an easy measure, the way a tide learns the shore. Inhale, warm bread, clean linen, old wood. Exhale, the day's noise, the court's chatter, the lists and ledgers and little worries that do not deserve to cross the night with you. If a thought knocks at the door, thank it for traveling so far and hang a tiny lantern on its handle. It will wait there till morning without complaining. Remember the small mercies you tucked into your pockets along the way, a spoon that kept the peace, a needle that drew quiet pictures, a joke that lifted a room by the width of a smile. Let them glow like embers, steady and kind. Now the fire settles, the snow hushes, and the last candle agrees to sleep. Listen, even the stones are resting. You are carried gently on the hush. Good night.